I'll start here. Scott Frank, who wrote the screenplay, also wrote Get Shorty. And it's funny, he and I discussed this. He called me a couple of times. The first time he called me, he said, I've got him in the trunk. He's writing the screenplay. Got him in the trunk. He said, but how do they see each other? I said, it's a law enforcement trunk. There's got to be all kinds of stuff in it. They find a flashlight. So that's how they happen to see each other. And everyone who read that particular scene, especially other directors, they thought they really wanted to do it. And they were especially anxious to do that scene. And Barry Sonnenfeld, who did Get Shorty, he said, I would shoot it dark. I would shoot the whole thing black. But it's about at least six pages in the book. And I said, I don't know if you can hold the audience that long with one screen. But the way it worked out, and Soderbergh, who did shoot it, I thought he did very well the way he brought in other scenes that took place at different times. So Scott Frank and I, we discussed the ending, and I thought it's just a happy ending. You know, I suppose it's better than well, it was certainly different than the book ending, because in the book, I think it ends when she's talking to her dad, and she says, well, he knew what he was doing, and her dad says, my daughter, the tough lady. Which, because I said to Scott Frank, I said, it's her story. And he said, it's her book, but it's his movie. So, you can't get around that. No, and I thought, and he said that Jack Foley was one of his favorite characters. So right now, I'm writing another one. I'm writing another Jack Foley. First I had to get him out of prison. He's facing 30 years. And then I thought of other characters that I would like to see in this new book. And I thought there was one who was in La Brava, who was Cuban. And we followed him from Cuba to Miami Beach, South Beach, where he gets involved in the plot. And I liked him a lot. I thought, but I didn't remember what happened to him. In La Brava, which I wrote, oh, what was that, about, I don't know, 25 years ago, okay. I had my prompter with the Greg Sutter, who does all the research. And I looked toward the back, and here's the last scene with Gundo Ray, the Cuban, and the marshal in that particular book was Raylan Givens. No. It was, I forget about, you know, what's going on in the plot. No, it was a guy, it was Joe LaBrava. Joe LaBrava, who was a Secret Service guy in the beginning, and he's bored with the job. He was guarding Beth Truman, and she was, I mean, he was the security in the house. And she was in the back in a bedroom, and he was watching movies. And a side story, I was trying to find out what the living room looked like, or where he was watching movies. And I was put in touch with a Secret Service man who had that particular assignment with Beth Truman. So I asked him, what did the living room look like? He said, I can't tell you any of that. You've got to get permission from Washington. So I wrote to Washington, and I got a lot of pamphlets about the Treasury Department and how good they are. what they're doing. But I didn't get permission from them for him to tell me what the room looked like. Then I called a former Secret Service guy on the West Coast, who I knew, who was now writing, and I said, how can I find out from this? He said, just call him up again and tell him I'll vouch for you. I can't think of his name because he's a good writer. So I called the one who had retired, and I said, so-and-so will vouch for you. And he said, I don't know his phone voice. No. So he wasn't going to take a chance. I don't know what kind of a chance he was taking. So I gave the assignment to Greg. I said, I don't know how to find this out. And he said, well, let me see what I can do. So the next day, Greg came to the house. He had a book, and he opened it, and there was a picture of the living room. And he said, it was a black and white shot. He says, the carpeting is green, and you go, and there's a picture of, over the fireplace is a picture of the daughter, who was writing then. And you go around the corner into the den where there was a television set. I said, well, how'd you find that out? He said, I called the house. That's why he's invaluable to me. So, Scott Frank, I thought, did a terrific job. And the way the scenes worked, the way they would bring in a scene, especially I thought the scene at the top of the Wren set, where they're in the bar, but actually weren't. That was done on a set in Hollywood. And when they're in the hotel room, the suite, the way that was interchanged, I thought they did a terrific job. And Soderbergh is awfully good, very good. So this one, the one I'm doing now, I had to get Foley out. I didn't want him to escape again, because it's not going to be that kind of a plot. But I have Kundo Ray, I find, well, he was shot. That was it. I find out he was shot by Joe LaBrava 3 times, right in the middle. And LaBrava runs out. He's got something else to do, and he assumes that Kundo is dead, and I guess I must have too, because he's not in the book anymore. But now I have the emergency guys pick him up and find out that he's still breathing, and they take him to the hospital, and he's in a coma for a while. And he extends the coma, only opening his eyes once in a while, find out his status, where he is and what's going on, but he's not. And finally he sneaks out of the hospital. He's not handcuffed to the bed. Of course he's there. I mean, he was shot because he was involved in crime. Then the third character I have for this new book that Jack Foley, I hope, will fall in love with, is Dawn Navarro. She's a psychic. She was in Riding the Rat, and so I'm going to bring her back and fix her up a little bit. I thought she was kind of, she was all right. She looks good, but I'm going to do a little bit more with her in this book. She is psychic. I found that out too, when I was writing the Rat. I wasn't sure if she was psychic or not, or if she was just psychic once in a while. But now she's psychic, because she tells Kundo Ray when they first meet in Hollywood, where he's selling cocaine, that he's going back to Florida. And she sees him in a courtroom. She said, I don't know when, sometime in the next year. And And that's what happens. So that he's in prison at the same time Foley is. And then he has a lot of money, so he has this lawyer he says to Foley, use this lawyer. And he pays for it. And it's someone who had bid to get their name in my book. But there's a lot of this going on. And this particular woman who is with a law firm downtown Detroit is the very cool young woman lawyer who gets Foley reduced from 30 years to 30 months. And time served. So the first couple of chapters of the book, they're in that Glades Correctional. And then he gets out first, and he's gonna. Gundo Ray says, "Why don't you go to one of my homes in Venice Beach, California?" Which he does, and the girl, Don Navarro, is in the other home. He's got two homes. He had bought a lot of homes and sold them and made a lot of money. So I'm hoping that George Clooney will like this one, but I need really a good idea. I'm at the point where I'm on page 80, between page 80 and say 100 and at least 120, no, that would be the extent of it. I think this next portion of 40 pages, something big has to happen. And I have no idea what it is. But this is the way I've always worked. So I'm not worried about it. I'm just thinking about it a lot. You know? And I talk to Greg just about every day. And every time I do, I'm inspired and I get a little bit closer to what I will be doing. So I never know what's going to happen in my books. I have no idea how this will end. And at this particular point, there are, his ex-wife is in it again. And everyone who knows him thinks once he gets out, he's going to rob another bank. Because that's all he knows. And I'm not sure if he will or not. I think he will tempt himself. I think he will see him in a bank, at least. And of course, now there's also an FBI guy who, on his own, has surveillance placed on Foley, so that because he's absolutely positive Foley's going to rob another bank, and so he's got a young Hispanic gang member who, with some other guys, is watching Foley, and the FBI guy has threatened him that you do what I tell you, or I'll have you deported. You know, maybe there's some other kind of a hold he has on the guy. I don't know. I'm still working on that. So I'm having a good time right now with the book. Of course, that's the purpose. I have to have a good time writing, and why do it? You know, it's not a chore. It's not. And you read about that. You read about writers who really don't like to write. But I do. I have rules that I follow. In fact, my rules are going to be published. They're coming out. There are 10 rules. You have to have at least 10, you know. And they'll be published October the 23rd. 10 rules, and guess how many pages are in the book? I think 95. Because some of the rules run on just a little bit. One of the rules, for example, well, the first rule is never open with the weather. Get to somebody, get to one of the characters, you know, because the reader wants to get going on this thing, and the weather, and too often, we often will use weather as a way to show off. And all it is show off writing. The second rule is never open with a prologue, and yet I quote, I forgot what rule he comes up in, I quote Steinbeck, because Steinbeck in Sweet Thursday said, he has, in his prologue, he has a character from Cannery Row who says, I don't like to read the authors describing the characters. I want to figure out what they look like from the way they talk and the way they act. I don't want him telling me everything, and also descriptions of other things. And so I read that in 1954 or 5, I think it was. And I really took that to heart because I hated to describe things myself. And I was writing then. I sold my first story in 51. So I was on my way. So I was very glad to read that. And I did notice that a lot of good writers, better writers, don't spend a lot of time with physical descriptions. Let's see what else. Well, anyway, the rules are, and they'll be illustrated, not each one, but they'll be, it's kind of a cartoon, I shouldn't say cartoon, but it is, that will run through it. And there will be an edition of the book with an ostrich binding along the spine, which will cost a little more. So, because I made up these rules a long time ago. Well, I made them up 7 years ago. But some of them I had discussed before, different places. And the rules have been mentioned quite a lot. And people have even been using the rules. I mean, have been publishing the rules, at least in the internet, and which I don't have. I don't have a computer, and because I'm still using this. And this particular one is a pilot, and this is a Pilot Precise V7, because they asked me, well, they wrote to me, they sent me all of their pens. And so I wrote back, and I wrote on one line with each pen, you know, different line, and told them what I thought of the pens. And finally I got down to the Pilot V7, and I said, this is the one. And so they sent me enough V7s to write a book. Because they said, you write 80,000, 90,000 words, which this pen has enough ink to last for like 1,000 yards. You would just keep writing. So they sent me that many pens. But I started with this one, and I decided that the V5 was better. At least for everyday writing, you know, because writing when you're writing a book freehand, you do an awful lot of crossing out. You do more crossing out than you do, I was going to say writing. No, that can't be, but you're left with a lot of lines that are crossed out. But very often you can still read what you crossed out. So that if you keep going and you think, wait a minute, and you have to go back to see what you were writing before, it's still there, you know. But the idea of writing with a pen is writing. Because I cannot imagine writing looking at a screen. I had an editor one time who said that she thought that writers who did go from typewriter or longhand to the computer, their writing wasn't quite as good. And she thought, because it looks so good to them on the screen. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's valid, but who knows? How about questions?
When someone does a movie from one of your books, do you have much input after that fact or after they get the screenwriter, other than what you had mentioned, the screenwriter would call you? Do you have anything to do with the producers or the directors or the...
They ask me who I see in casting it. And I'll say, well, for this one, for example, I said Elizabeth Shue. And they, no matter which one, who I suggest, they always say, oh, that's interesting. They did test Elizabeth Shue. And also Ashley Judd, I saw. And I didn't think of Jennifer Lopez, but they asked her and immediately knew she was the one. And I thought it was a great idea because I had seen you know, I mean, previous pictures. She's good. She knows how to act. She's herself. I thought she's great. So I don't know if she's going to be, if Karen Sisco is going to be in this new book. If she comes in the end, I don't know. I don't know if I would need to use it because I'm hoping that Jack Foley is going to fall in love with the psychic. Because he's kind of, you know, she's looking better at it with him all the time. But obviously, I think she's going to scare him a little bit. Any other questions? Yeah?
Any chance that we might see Pagan Babies on film one day?
I would hope we do. There was, I can't think of her name. Who was it who was interested in Pagan Babies? Kathy Bates. Kathy Bates came to town and wanted to look around and different areas that took place in the book. And she wanted to do it. And she was going to write it, and then she hoped she was going to direct it too. Then she became ill, and she said, I'm not going to be able to do it. I don't know what she's doing now, how ill she still is. But she hadn't bought it, you know. So, but we thought, see what you can do with it, and then we'll make a deal. I haven't written a movie since '93, and because I finally decided I don't like to write movies at all. I love movies, but I hate to read scripts. To me, they're so limited. You know, I'll have a couple of people talking for as long as I want them to talk, or as long as I think they're interesting, or something is developing. But I just don't care for the format, the screenplay format.
I have a question about the research that you did. And all of your stories, from the early Western stories to the stories in Detroit and Miami, there's such rich detail. You do a lot of, consistent about the research that you do a lot before.
He's sitting next to you. That's the one. He gets me everything and more. Because there's always something else that comes along that's like dessert, and I think, oh God, that's a great idea. You know, something that maybe it just makes the character more human. It doesn't have anything to do with the plot, but it's so interesting that you want to use it, want to refer to it. In the Westerns, I researched. When I started writing Westerns, because there was such a terrific market for Westerns in the 50s, and there were still pulp magazines. So I wrote a Western and I sent it to a couple pulp magazines, and was rejected. So I thought, no, I should do this right. I should do some research and find out what was going on in Arizona and New Mexico in the 1880s, and find out all about the Indians, the Apache Indians, and also what cowboys were doing, what they wore, what kind of coffee they drank, what kind of guns they used, and I found all that out. Then I wrote about 30 short stories, and 5 during the 50s, 5 Western books. And some of those were made into movies. Then into the 60s, I wrote 3 more. Hombre, Valdez is Coming, Burt Lancaster. Hombre was Paul Newman. Did one for Eastwood. Joe Kidd wasn't very good, but he did. 310 to Yuma, which I did I wrote the short story in 1953, and it appeared in Dime Western. It was, they paid 2 cents a word, so it was 4,500 words. I got $90 for it. And then a year or so later, Columbia bought it, and they made a picture with Glenn Ford and Van Heflin, which was shown at the Telluride Film Festival. I was there a few years ago, and it stands up. It looks pretty good. Well, it's been made again. Last year, Tom Cruise was very interested in doing it. And it was announced that it was going to be a $80 million picture. I think the original might have cost $1 million or $1.25 million. He walked away, walked off it, and then Russell Crowe, decided he wanted to do it. Now it's a $50 million picture. And they made it. And in May, I was in Los Angeles. I was on a book tour, and they heard I was there, so they invited me to see a cut of the picture, which I saw, I watched, and then they videotaped me right after. First they gave me a sheet of questions. That had to do with more. Well, some of the questions had to do with Westerns, and then some had to do specifically with 310 to Yuma. And I assumed that they would then show this to the director. Maybe not. But I answered all the questions. And there were parts of it I didn't understand, the ending. But I thought it looked good. It had a very good look to it. And there were a lot of good things, except that there was so much going on in the film. Because the original story, a guy is hired who needs money because of problems he's having with his land, his ranch. He's hired for a couple $100 to take this well-known outlaw to a certain town and hold him there for when the 310 to Yuma arrives, and put him on the train. And the outlaw, he has a gang. He has a gang that's down there in the street. So how's he going to get him to the train? But he won't back down. Van Heflin won't back down. Glenn Ford is offering him money. You know, what do you want to get shot for? Here, take a couple $100, go home. And but he won't do it. That's the whole point of it. But then when you add other elements, when you add other ideas, situations, I think it waters down the intent, the original, the central intent of the story. Walter Winchell called the picture 3 hours and 10 minutes after high noon. which is, you know, he could get away with that.
Well, first of all, go ahead. Well, the first question I have, you read this book, could I get it all done?
Sure.
Okay, the other thing is, it's not a question, but you're sort of a hero of mine, and we kind of parallel our lives, except you have talent and I'm a reader. And you're the writer. But I grew up in Royal Oak, Michigan, and I went to Shrine of the Flower, and I knew Father Coughlin, who we wrote him up a little bit in this book.
Yes.
And so, but I feel that you and I have, all the things you've written about Detroit, I've either experienced or thought about or tried to figure it out. And this, I remember very vividly when the Germans escaped from Canada, came across the bridge and all that, started taking the town, whatever it was. And so, I just, it's delightful that there's somebody from Detroit that presented Detroit. Because most of the things I read when I was younger were New York or Los Angeles or Miami. And I thought, well, Detroit has as much history and things to write about as any place in the country, and you came through to do that. And so I'd like to thank you for that.
Well, good. I've been here since 1934. Born in New Orleans, lived in Dallas, Oklahoma City, and Memphis. Came here in the 4th grade, halfway through the 4th grade. Tigers were playing St. Louis in the World Series. And I've always liked Detroit. Last week in the news, in the Detroit News, there was a big piece on me that had to do with Woodward Avenue and how Woodward was such a part of my life growing up, taking the streetcar downtown, taking the streetcar everywhere.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
Neil Rubin and I used to sell newspapers at the corner of South and Main Street where Lopez the streetcar ended. They turned around there. And I remember the streetcar fare, you can tell me if I'm wrong, was going to be in 6 cents, not 7 cents.
Well, it was 7 when I was doing it, yeah. And it was always 7. Then you could ride downtown to the foot of Woodward and take the ferry to Windsor for a nickel.
Right.
And then you'd come back and you go to Verner's and get a lot of free, which was down right there too, and get a lot of free ginger ale samples. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Could I go back to the research question? Did Doug do the research for Cuba Libre?
Yes, in fact, Greg went to Cuba. He didn't get permission, but he went. He went through Mexico, I think. And specifically, I needed what the interior of the Inglaterra Hotel looked like, which is still there. And but I finished the book before Greg got back. He was having a good time in Havana and all over Cuba. But there weren't things that he would have to get from me outside of this one specifically, because there was so much written about Cuba from 1898, time of the Spanish-American War, on. I mean, specific details about that would be of interest to American industry, American farming, and so on. So I'm hoping that will sell. Originally, Universal optioned it for 2 years, and we suggested that they have the Coen brothers do a screenplay, and they were interested, and they did. They did 2 drafts, but they weren't interested in directing. So, but they really didn't have a good feel for that particular, for a Western. And that's really what my book was. It's a Cuban Western. But I think it might get going again. Now Kevin Costner, he's interested in redoing Hombre, which is the Paul Newman picture. And I'm hoping that my agent can steer him on to Cuba Libre.
When you get ready to start a new work, what is it that generates the kernel of the idea?
I was trying to think of how this would start. And out of sight.
The photo.
Huh?
The photo in the news.
Oh, that one? Of course, of course. Greg got me a photo, sent me a photo that was about 5 years old when he sent it to me. And it was there was a woman, of course, a woman, United States Marshal, standing in front of the federal courthouse in Miami with a shotgun on her hip, like that. And I looked at the picture and I said, that's a book. But several years passed before I came around to it and finally did it. That picture still looks good. I still have it. And, well, so Karen Cisco then became a TV series. I think it was ABC. Did 6 times, but it wasn't done right. It was not done right because the writers didn't really have a firm idea. This was Carla Gugino who played the part. They didn't have a real fixed idea of what her character personality was, and also her dad. They didn't. Her dad, who was not Farina, who was huh?
Forrester.
Yeah, Robert Forrester, who was in Jackie Brown. He was the bail bondsman. Anyone else?
Over here.
Yeah.
When you struggle through a chapter in a book, you know, who do you go to that can be a sounding board that won't try to steer you in a certain direction?
The only one I talk to is Greg.
Okay.
The only one. I don't talk to other people. No one is really that interested. They want to hear me telling them something, you know? But when I'm talking to Greg, I'll have ideas. I'll get an idea while I'm talking and express it to him as though, and he might even think that I've been thinking about it for quite a while, but it came that moment, you know? But you don't know when you're going to get ideas. I was going to do Bill Friedkin in Hollywood. He wanted me to write a screenplay for him. And he gave me one that desperately needed to be rewritten, but I didn't like the idea. And so I said, why don't I just make up my own? And he said, yeah, do it. So I made up an idea, but he didn't like it because it had to do with Colombian drug money that was going to be sitting in a house for one night only. Several $1 million would be sitting in the house, and they were going to send it out to be laundered. And it would come back, it would be clean, and they could use it. And, but it had to go through all that business. But someone, burglar comes before they can send it out, ship it out, and he's just looking for a TV set, but he picks up this igloo cooler that's got a lot of money in it. And then that's the new idea, see? So, but Bill Friedkin said, I don't want any drug money, I don't want any dope dealers, I don't want any of that. I said, well, I don't know why the money is sitting there if you don't do that. And he says, well, you want to look, why don't we sit down, we'll talk about it, we'll think about it. I said, no, I can't do that. I have to do it myself. I don't want to exchange ideas with anyone. So I came to Los Angeles for something else. And my agent said, why don't you go home and write a book instead of fooling with this? And I said, look, I'm going to think about it for 3 hours. And if I don't have an idea in 3 hours, I'll go home. So the next day, and I went to bed in the hotel, and I woke up the next morning at 5 o'clock. And I always wake up early, like that when I'm out there. So I woke up, I got an idea in about 5 minutes. That was a pretty good idea, but then I had to wait 3 hours to call free until 8 o'clock. But we never did it. I wrote the screenplay, and they paid for it, and it was all right, but it needs work. And it's sitting at Paramount right now. I forgot the title. Even. Yes.
Did you attend a college at all, and if so, what was your major?
English, UD. Because I'd be reading anyway. Of course, I wouldn't be reading any of the books that were in the courses. All those old tales.
Do you have any advice for any wannabe writers?
Well, you've got to write a lot. You got to keep writing. But you've got to find someone who's writing that you can use as a style. You like the sound of it. Sound is so important. Sound to me is everything. My idea is to show rather than tell. I want scenes that are vivid, that are going on, and dialogue. I love dialogue, so I use as much dialogue as I can. And I think it's the way to describe people. I think that what I learned reading the Sweet Thursday about the dialogue, bringing the person out, describing the person. I think that's so important. So I have a good time writing, and I like to make it up as I go along, because I don't, perhaps 40 years ago I outlined the book. I don't know. I think I did then. But I don't want to do it now, because you've expended that energy in thinking of a scene. There was one, for example, that I thought of, where a guy in a wheelchair is taking pictures on the beach, on the sidewalk along the beach in South Beach in Miami. And a guy comes walking up to him, and he says, and what he's doing, he's taking pictures of people coming off the beach, and then he will give them a card, and he'll meet him the next day and give them the prints if they want to pay $5 or $10, whatever it is. That was the idea, the original idea. But I didn't do it right away until finally, when I did a book, I can't think of what it was. Huh? What's LeBron? Was it? Photography. La Brava has a friend who stole a wheelchair out of the airport. And he's always riding around in this wheelchair, but now he's going to go somewhere, so he leaves the wheelchair for La Brava. And he happens to be he has to take it out on the sidewalk in South Beach. And because now the original idea, the guy comes along while he's sitting there taking pictures, and he says, "Let me see your camera." This hustler comes along, and he looks at the camera, he says, "Yeah, I like it. I think I'll take it," and walks off with it. not knowing that the guy in the wheelchair he's not crippled. He gets up and grabs the guy and bangs his head on the pavement. And then, when I got a chance to do it, and now Joe LaBrava is sitting in it, and the guy looks at the camera and he says, yeah, I think I'll take it, and turns around and starts to walk off. And LaBrava does not say a word, but the guy then has to stop. And he turns around and he says, can you walk? And LaBrava says, I can walk. And the guy comes back and hands him the camera. You know, I thought it worked a lot better than if you were to beat his head on the counter. So, but the idea of coming up with the idea helps you to write it. Helps you to write it. And if you have thought of it before, now you've made a note of it, I think you will have lost something when the time comes to write it.
Do you often change direction in a story and maybe rework part of a story and take it in a different direction, or do you find yourself pretty linear with the story plot?
I'm fairly linear. Right now, it's taking me longer now. I used to write a book in 4 months, 5 months. Now it takes me 8 months. And mainly because I'm slower getting started. I don't have that, I've got to get it done, that hunger, you know. Now it's, I'm older, I'm a lot older, and I continue to try and think of fresh ideas. So that writing is just rewriting anything. I don't think I've ever written a whole page where there it is. You know, it's mostly scratched out. I don't have big changes in plot direction. But as I'm going along, once I find out who the characters are, and I think that in the first 100 pages, the main characters will be introduced, and I'll know who they are, and if they can talk, they're in. They're in the book. If they can't talk, they may have to get shot or something. But that's what happens.
I just want to say that we're truly, truly honored to have you here. And I don't know if you know, if we explain what PA is, but right now there are people on the internet at the PA webpage that have been listening to you talk all around the world. And what we love about this is that you're a master. And your creative process is something that should be, you know, carried on. And I'm so happy that my son got to hear it. It's very important for the youth to hear this from the masters in this digital world. So it's a great honor to me that I have a master writer here to explain this process. I'd love to give you a big round of applause. Francis, my uncle, said, you know, one of the problems in film today is that there's a real detachment from the human being and the film. You can't get any sense of humanity, which is true with all the digital stuff. When you read Mr. Leonard's work, I mean, all those people are human beings. They're not just little drawn-out characters. They're human. And they're so well drawn out. I mean, that's why I always say you're the last great American writer. I mean, they're so well drawn out, more so than even a movie. So you really can learn from a fellow human being as great as Mr. Leonard. Do you have anything you could say though about a creative process? Like you're using the internet too. You have a great. Do you do the webpage? It's a great webpage. I mean, listen to all the blogs. But, so more and more, when people use the digital arena to communicate, I think we can keep that human spirit alive. Do you have anything you'd like to say about that in the digital arena? What's important?
I don't know anything about the digital arena. So that, as I started to say earlier though, I think you've got to find out someone you like, a writer, that you can imitate. I think that's the main thing, because I started imitating Hemingway, and he's very easy to imitate. In fact, there's a contest, I think, every year where you do something Hemingway-esque, and and someone wins. And it's probably, I'm sure, overdone, you know. I love his short stories. I can still read his short stories and get a thrill, really. The words, the way they're just sitting there, I think they're terrific.
Well, what I'm hoping from this is there'll be a lot of young writers out there and other artists that will steal from you.